Chapter 1801. Tessa's Tribulation. The tribulation didn't wait for everyone to get there, though they all tried their best to be on time for Tessa's surprise advancement. The last one to make it was Ray, who had been busy working with a customer to finish an order, and then snuck out, leaving Maish to run the shop while she watched Tessa's advancement. Maish didn't mind. This was her first chance to really prove herself to Lady Ray and earn some favor from the notoriously terrifying spider. She was fairly sure that Ray was actually fond of her, but her mannerisms made it difficult to tell, and that left the girl with some concerns that Ray might kick her out of the shop if she didn't perform well enough. That would be terrible for her future in the guild, as this was the best place to sell the items that she was just now learning to make. She had been appointed as the manager, but Maish lacked any sort of confidence in dealing with Ray if the spider was in a bad mood. She already knew how that could end for people that Ray did not like, and she had no intentions of becoming part of the spider's next bath. If Ray knew what she was thinking, she would be at least mildly insulted. She didn't turn on useful people like that, and Maish was an ongoing project. She had already put a lot of effort into improving the girl, and now she was beginning to see the payoff. Like breeding smaller creatures to defend your nest, she was raising the girl to run her cloth shop and help her make clothing. It was a win for everyone, and the better that Maish did for herself, the better that she would do in defending Ray's shop. Getting impatient now, or sending her away, would be counterproductive. Only once Maish was fully grown into her powers and Ray was ready to move on to a new shop would she be prepared to stop keeping the girl at her side. Until then, there wasn't much that would stop her from guiding Maish toward a greater future. The first bolt of tribulation lightning hit just before Ray arrived, a massive disturbance that shook the ground and startled every creature living in the tiny world. Unlike the other advancements that had happened here, the ones for the lizard folk and the demons, this one was particularly violent, and the individual strikes appeared to be even more intense than usual. Then, Ray settled in with the crowd, and the second strike slammed into the barrier that Tessa had put up around herself. The divine power and the tribulation lightning seemed to merge for a second in an impossible combination of gold and blue. Then the barrier stabilized, and a third strike, this one made of a half-dozen smaller bolts of lightning converging over her head, pounded into her barrier. Tessa remained perfectly focused as the wrath of the tribulation lightning increased, and Thor silently cheered her on. The fourth strike was the same as the third, only more intense, and the fifth was strong enough that even Thor began to feel the intensity of the lightning. The sixth strike shattered every barrier that Tessa had put up, and Carl saw smoke coming from the red scales on her body as the war beast transformation tanked the worst of the damage. Hurriedly, she put the barriers back up, just in time for the seventh volley of lightning to crash into her, scorching her robes and exposing large patches of scaled skin. For the eighth volley, her barriers were shaky, as she had mostly exhausted her mana storage during the earlier strikes. The barriers shattered immediately, and Tessa was slammed to the ground, her scales charred and smoking, but already regenerating as she gritted her teeth and focused on gathering as much mana as possible for what was bound to be the strongest strike of them all. Dana watched in horror at the fury of the tribulation, so much worse than what she had undergone, as if the god of war was personally testing his disciple to see if she truly was worthy. The final set of barriers was better than the eighth set had been, but it was far from being enough to take the full force of the tribulation. The final volley did not come as a single strike, but as 9 simultaneous bolts of lightning crashing into Tessa from different angles, shattering every scale on her body, and leaving the ground under her a shining black volcanic rock. It was marked with hand, knee and footprints from where she had been braced, visible after the impact, as her body was tossed to the side. The tribulation faded, and Thor rushed over to his wife as Lotus, Leo, and Tion all cast healing spells at the same time. You couldn't heal someone in the middle of the tribulation without causing even more issues. But you could start the moment that it ended. Her body was visibly mending under the combined efforts of her friends, and Tessa's power was steadily growing as her flesh knit back together and her scales regrew. Slowly, she rolled over and gave the group a V for victory gesture before passing out. Thor chuckled as he picked up his wife and draped a blanket over her. Well, that's one more immortal for the group. Now we're down to just a few of the ladies. I know you can't be far behind, especially Lotus, with that immortal bear bonded to you. Lotus nodded. It will be soon. And then we will have a full team again. Well, assuming that Ophelia is right behind me. The werbear laughed and swatted her girlfriend on the backside. What makes you think that I'm going to be slower than you to reach immortality? I have motivation and fluff on my side. Lotus stated it as if it were an unquestioned fact that being in the presence of Fluff was good for her advancement, and not a distraction that kept her from getting things done. Perhaps it was when the Fluff started making demands. Chapter 1802. They love Tessa. With Tessa recovering from tribulation, and the air in the tiny world still crackling with power, the young dragons began their day, learning all about the essentials of power and the world. The tribulation of Tessa was a reminder to them that you had to work hard to earn the power that you were born to wield, and that there was no slacking allowed if you wanted to reach the highest peaks. Of course, most of the dragons didn't know that they would never have to undergo the tribulation. They were born in a world with immortal energy. It had become part of them before they hatched, and as such, they were already considered to be immortal rank beings in some minuscule way. It wouldn't be a fast process for them to get up to the actual power level associated with the immortal realm, especially given the slow growth rate of dragons. But they would get there. Nobody left the space until Tessa woke up, nearly an hour later, fully healed but exhausted. Good morning, sunshine. Welcome to immortality. We have snacks. Carl greeted her as the war priestess woke up. That's the first thing? The first thing that you thought that I should hear once I woke up as an immortal? Carl laughed. Yep. That's the first thing that will welcome you into the rest of your never-ending life. It was that, or have Thor sing you a song about hatchlings. Thor gasped in realization that such a song had actually been an option. If he had thought of it, he would have done it. Tessa smiled as she saw the series of expressions cross Thor's face and then patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry about it. After all that, I could actually use something to eat. I am starving. Lotus laughed and made a grand gesture to call the bunnies in. Fortunately for you, I am your friend, and I always have food ready. Now we feast and celebrate. Ladies, bring anyone else who would like to join the festivities over to the main room of the house, and we will be there shortly. Tessa just needs the first round of snacks to get enough energy to get down the stairs without Thor carrying her. That wouldn't actually be a problem in Thor's mind, but Tessa was an immortal now, and there was some sort of dignity required. Or so Lotus assumed. Really, it was the other way around. They were now the weakest and among the youngest immortals. If there was any time to be undignified and childish, it was now. Compared to the elders, who had lived for 1,000 years or more, Tessa, making immortal at just under 30 years old, made her a practical child in their eyes. They didn't need to tell Lotus that she would do it all by herself once she made it to immortality. Besides, Tessa wasn't the sort. She had children on the way, a stable relationship, a war god to please by taking care of the orphans they had adopted. So many orphans. In the eyes of the Red Dragon, the bunnies also counted as war orphans, as the Darklight host had killed their previous owner and taken their homes. So, they were displaced by war, and most of them had no parents. Perfect qualifications to be taken care of by the Red Dragons. Not that the bunnies needed taking care of. They were happy to take care of themselves and anyone else who happened to be nearby, as long as they weren't absolutely terrified of them. That pretty much ruled out the lichens and a few other predator-type species. But for some reason, they didn't seem to have any problems with Ophelia, despite her being a werbear. Apparently, it wasn't the lycanthropy or the teeth, but the species that was the determining factor. Wolves hunted bunnies, but apparently bears were not proactive about it. Possibly because they couldn't catch them. However, it wasn't the bunnies that were the most excited about Tessa making immortal. It wasn't even the demons or lizard folk who had done it before her, here in the tiny world. No, that honor went to Ewan and Tenna, the adventurous pair of hatchlings who managed to get to the party before any of the other young dragons. Tessa took good care of them when Naksha was hunting them down for escaping the nest again. The black dragon smiled as she saw her wayward charge arrive on the scene. For once, he was actually where he was supposed to be, and it was entirely because he had wanted to explore and see the exciting parts up close. "Welcome, little ones." Lotus made breakfast burritos. The black dragon greeted them. Winning. Then the hatchlings were off, looking for Lotus and the peak snack of hatchling black dragons. Divine lightning dragons as well, but there was some dispute about whether the burritos were better than chocolate fudge brownies. Yuan insisted that sweets were still ranked second, simply because they lacked meat. Technically, the burritos did as well, but they had eggs, and that was basically meat of the unborn, which was pretty hardcore. Yuan liked eggs. Soon, Tessa was swarmed with hatchlings, eager to tell her all about how happy they were that she had reached immortality, and how they would get there soon, and how there were snacks, and how they were all excited about the day that her eggs hatched. It would be a sad day for them when she went to the immortal world to start building her power. But they didn't know it was going to happen yet. "All right, everyone back up 2 steps. You can't all hang off Sister Tessa at the same time. You'll tear her robes," the matron announced. "Yes, Mississippi." The dragons dutifully took 2 steps back, and then immediately returned to their overlapping questions and congratulations, as Tessa knelt to pat them all and assure them that she was listening to their stories. Carl laughed as he realized that Tessa was never going to be able to outrun the group mom role that the Red Dragon clerics were saddled with. Even the hatchlings treated her that way. Chapter 1803. Immortal Gifting. Tessa let immortal energy flow into herself for the first time, feeling the difference in her power now that she had advanced. It was not just a matter of using different power, the way that it was used was slightly different. "This is incredible. There was so much that I didn't truly understand until I could actually use immortal energy. Now I see why it's so hard for mortals to break through without guidance. It's not something that you can learn from a book. You have to experience it before you can truly know what it is to be immortal. Perhaps we should add that to our training? A bit of immortal energy injection for those near the bottleneck to help their bodies understand when it is time for tribulation." She was mostly talking to herself, but the other dragons were taking notes. They were all still mortals, and while they were gaining power quickly, they were still behind Tessa and the others. So this knowledge would be useful for them, not just in theory for their charges, but personally for when they eventually managed to ascend. Being pure dragons, they would eventually. They lived long enough that it was basically inevitable in these circumstances. Every bit of knowledge that they could get before they ascended would make the process easier, and help keep them ahead of the hatchlings, who would grow into proper immortals simply by virtue of having been born in the tiny world. It was an unfair advantage. Well, it looks like the Darklight host did get an immortal recruit during this event, even if we didn't find her at the New Home Merchant Clan's compound. Dana joked as Tessa was continually swarmed by the hatchlings. "It seems so. I guess we should throw a party, perhaps make her a welcoming gift." "That seems to be the tradition among the clans during the recruitment," Carl agreed. "What would I even need? I mean, there is plenty of immortal rank gear available. We're not short on that," Tessa joked. "That's just a given. Everyone in the guild gets the good gear." "No, we need to come up with something special. If you were going to move into the guild house in the immortal world, I would offer to make you your own custom room. But I suspect that you'll be remaining here to be closer to the little ones." "That won't work. But there has to be something." The hatchlings began to panic at the thought of Tessa moving away. She was the less scary red dragon, the one that was in charge of things like bath time and morning exercises. Not horrible, awful things like chores, study time, or bedtime enforcement. They had completely forgotten that they used to hate bath time until Tessa made it fun for them, and not just the water element dragons who had to be dried before bed. They blamed that on the bedtime people. Not Tessa, though. In theory, they could just sleep wet. There wasn't really a health issue with it for the water dragons. However, they did tend to make a gigantic mess if they were allowed to sleep in the water. So, sleeping dry was part of their training to get along with others. "You know, we could make her something special. Something that would please her god. What about a mobile armory and training space?" Dana suggested. "That's brilliant. Keeping a stock of weapons on hand will always please the war god, and a training ground is exceptionally useful for the orphans. Plus, it's a good place for Tessa to relax when she is off shift," Carl agreed. If he was going to do this, he would do it right. He would make the core of the space with the help of the Amulet of Destruction to bring it to one sub-rank higher than himself, making it a mid-ascended rank immortal space. Then, he would use Breath of the World to improve the quality by one rank, which should make it peerless. With that level of quality, even if Tessa wanted to train the dragons, she could do it for quite some time without fear of damaging anything inside the space. As long as the item was bonded to her, training inside it wouldn't damage anything. Much like activating skills through your own weapon didn't damage the weapon, unless they were far too powerful for it to handle. So, she could use it herself very nearly forever. By the time that she was powerful enough that an ascended immortal training ground was no more use to her, there would be no problem getting her a better one. And then, she could pass that one down to the next generation. As he planned the runes for the new item, Carl briefly wondered how many heirlooms there were floating around the immortal realms that had exactly that story. A cool thing that someone had custom-made centuries ago, and now it was passed down from generation to generation because items on that level didn't simply wear out. Unless someone died with them in their inventory, they would last very literally forever. While Carl worked, the others got busy arranging the advancement party for Tessa. Everyone in the tiny world was already here, and they were already cooking, so there wasn't actually much to do. Just decide what sort of music suited the occasion, and try to keep the dragon whelps from drowning as they all tested out Ewan's theories on diving techniques. The water dragons had informed them all that you could actually use your wings to swim in the water, like you use them to fly through air. But there was still much discussion about the best ways to get yourself into the water, especially for those species with thicker bodies, as the water dragons tended to be longer and more serpentine. "Miss Tessa, come swim with us," someone called, speaking Draconic. "All right, pool party it is. Everyone, switch to your swimsuits." Chapter 1804, After Party. Carl ignored the call to go swimming for a solid 3 seconds before the thought of Dana in a swimsuit put the task of finishing the gift on the low priority list. He could deliver it tomorrow, he had time. He swapped outfits to a pair of knee-length swim shorts that Ray had made for him and shook his head in dismay as he saw the chaos in the lake. Everyone who wasn't actively cooking or eating was in the water, and the hatchlings were dive-bombing the lake, terrorizing the fish. They weren't hunting them right now. The food was already sorted for the evening, but they did love to dive at them. "Mr. Carl, will you dive with us?" Ewan asked. Carl laughed and transformed into demon crow form, then raced into the air and dive-bombed the lake, gliding smoothly under the surface to come up next to Dana, where he transformed back. The little dragons cheered, and Carl wrapped his arms around his wife. "That was too cool. I need to learn to do that. If you kept your eyes open, you'd know where you're going. But then I'd get water in them." Dana laughed as the dragons argued. "See what you've started. Now poor Tessa will never get them out of the water. But they're washed up and clean. I'm pretty sure that getting them to go to bed was someone else's problem. Besides, she just advanced. That's definitely worth a day off." The other dragons nodded. "That's the tradition in the church. If you advance, you get the rest of the day and the whole next day off." That didn't seem like much, but the church was always busy, and taking more than that off would deprive someone of a much-needed healer. And one that had just advanced to a new rank, which meant it was a more powerful group or more critical patient that would be missing out. Thor splashed happily through the water as he chased Tessa around, with a group of dragons chasing them. Everyone was having a grand time, and even the orphanage matron had begun to unwind a little. At least by her standards. She hadn't gone as far as a bikini, but she had switched to a light silk dress, in red, naturally, and chased the hatchlings into the water. By her standards, that was positively frolicking, even if she was still doing her best to keep the little dragons from getting injured or running off too far from the group. A huge splash, followed by giggling, informed Carl that Tifa had found a new swimming technique. She could enter her space, and then appear in the air near Lotus, to cannonball into the water, despite not being able to fly. She was gaining a new appreciation for the joys of playing in the water and learning a bit more about why the dragons thought this was such a great place. Simply walking in was no fun at all. You just got wet, and then had to swim. The first signs that the food was ready brought Thor and Tessa out of the water, and the former Sero brought her a large blanket, where he had set up a proper picnic. Thor always one that put great effort into romance, and he had planned this well in advance, expecting that Tessa would make immortality sooner or later. Karl followed his lead and picked up Dana to bring her to the beach for dinner. Following Thor's lead and hoping for romance, Dana joked as Karl set her on his lap when he sat down. Thor has all the moves, but I suspect that he's going to find a reason to slip away with Tessa as soon as they've finished eating. And you're not going to follow his lead? I'm not sure that we should wait that long. Most of the kids are already exhausted, and it's a good time to retire to our room for a bit. The guild store can run itself for a bit. If it gets out of hand, I will send the watchers down to take care of it. Dana laughed at the thought of the eldritch horror-looking summons running a store. Karl didn't use them in combat, so she assumed that they weren't a combat-capable unit. But with a skill name like Pet Sitter, they had to have some sorts of skills. It was one of his few mysterious skills. The rest Karl used often enough that Dana at least understood the basics of how they worked, the limitations, and some of the tactical advantages. But that particular one seemed to have been overlooked for the most part. Then she saw one. Karl, do you have your watchers active here in the tiny world?
What?
Oh, that's not one of the watchers. Opal just made a golem that looked like one when she was setting things up for the bunnies. Something about warm hugs and tentacles. Dana frowned. There was something deeply and profoundly wrong with that statement when it was related to Opal. But she wasn't entirely certain what the Fae had planned. However, it wasn't as nefarious as Dana thought. Or perhaps it was even more nefarious. Like Sero golems who had a mental link to their herd, the ability of the Watchers to share their senses with their creator and each other also activated when you made them with illusionary domain and reality warp. So, having the frightening-looking but incredibly friendly creatures around the tiny world was better than having cameras set up. Not everywhere in the tiny world was an illusion that she could look in on. But the Watchers were constructs, and nobody thought twice about where they were going, as long as they weren't in the way. Plus, the Watchers had a natural instinct to help and protect, so the orphanage dragons liked to have them around, even if they didn't have the powers of the real ones. Though, the only actual power that the real ones had was pet space, which they used to create things that the residents of the tiny world needed. Chapter 1805. No slacking. First thing in the morning, while Dana slept soundly beside him, Karl finished up the gift for Tessa. She might not need the training space for some time, but it wouldn't do to delay her advancement gift for too long. Now that she was an immortal, he could start introducing her to the Lycans and the members of the new home merchant clan. Everyone would simply assume that Karl had recruited a member when they saw a new face around the guild compound, assuming that she came out of the tiny world at all. Tessa was still a red dragon priestess, despite her class advancements. So, she had a compulsion to keep to the tenets of her god. And all the best things to keep the red dragon pleased were in the tiny world right now, unless someone attacked them. Karl mentally searched the space and found that Tessa was already awake, having breakfast with the hatchlings, while teaching them to play nice with the bunnies. The dragons often forgot that other species didn't have tough scales, so claws hurt all the time, not just when you were trying to make them hurt. That was an important lesson before the young dragons could transform into humanoids. Karl tossed the gem through a portal, letting it land on the table in front of Tessa, who simply smiled and shook her head, knowing that he didn't want to get out of bed to hand it to her directly. If he got out of bed, he would have to do things and start answering questions from all the other guild members who had been busy all night, making items for the shops. Even the alchemists here in the tiny world had been busy helping Remy with her efforts. They might be mostly mortals, but they could still prep all the ingredients, saving the Naga matriarch a lot of time when making multiple batches of potions and pills. The concept of pills was becoming increasingly popular among the Darklight host. They were more convenient to use as medicine than potions were, so anything that could be condensed into a solid pill had been. Naturally, some things needed to remain a liquid, and the ointments were perfectly balanced as they were. It was mostly just the healing medicines that they were focused on. Those were the ones that needed to be easier to use in an emergency. Plus, the bunnies had even come up with a better way of carrying them that was Lotus approved. They took some of the failed pills, ones that had come out at common and uncommon quality, and wouldn't be sold in the shop, and pulled a thin wire through the middle of them. Hung around the neck like a necklace, they could be eaten like candy in an emergency. That was a tactic that Lotus had used before with medicine, but if they made them out of higher quality medicines, they would sell incredibly well as decorative jewelry. After all, who would assume that all those small round stones were pills, and not rocks? From a distance, it was impossible to tell them apart. Carl wasn't able to sleep in for long, no matter how much he wanted to. They had an increasing number of customers arriving at the guild shop this morning, all eager to see what was going to be stocked for the day. Everyone knew that the Darklight host had the ability to make peerless grade items, so they were fully expecting to see something appear. With thousands of peak immortals gathered at New Home and the 2 locations linked by a portal, this was the perfect opportunity to find customers for all the best gear, and the Blackwoods pack knew it. So, they were sure to get Carl out of bed and down to the shop. Duty calls. I should likely pick out a selection of good stuff for today before I get there, or they're going to panic. I suppose that leaving them in the guild store bank would have been better, but it's been so long since the last time that I forgot it was an option. Dana laughed at Carl's annoyed tone. Go take care of your loyal customers. I suspect that Lotus is going to advance in the next day or 2. Her aura is already unstable, and Tifa is pushing her hard against the bottleneck with her growth. All right, you stay here. Let me know when she does advance. If you want to make some items while you wait, just toss them in the store inventory. They split up, and Carl transported himself directly to the back room of the shop, making it look to the customers as if he had been in the back office. Good morning, everyone. I've got a restock for the peerless grade items ready for sale. You're just in time. The peak immortals gathered around, watching the upper shelf where Carl had put the best items last time. One by one, he restocked the shelves, loading them with warrior items, and then a pair of mage rings that would grant a combined mana regeneration rate higher than nearly anyone present could actually spend it, as well as a steady rate of stamina regeneration. A matched pair of peerless grade rings like that for a combat mage would make them nearly unstoppable, the warriors assumed. The easiest way to defeat a mage was to wait for them to run low on mana or exhaust themselves casting. If they didn't do either, then defeating a skilled mage was a nightmare for most warrior-type classes. There was no doubt about it. Those items were going to sell, and they were going to sell to the same person. It was just a matter of who could afford them. While the warriors rushed to inspect the items that actually mattered to them, one more figure slipped into the room, wrapped in a soft black cloak. She stood at the back of the room, staring at the items. Not with the sort of greed and lust for power that most had, but with a growing sense of confusion, as if she had seen something impossible and was struggling to understand it. Chapter 1806. An Old Friend. The warriors began to push and jostle each other until Carl whistled, reminding them that he could and would kick them out of the store if they started fighting in here. Nobody wanted that. I will take the spiked gauntlet, a warrior announced, slamming a bag of materials down on the counter. Carl watched the system count the value and nodded. We have a deal. The gauntlet was passed to the warrior, and Carl replaced it with a pair of bracers that had similar stats, but without the combat damage that only came on weapons. There was some more arguing among the warriors before another bag of resources was placed on the counter next to a rare void element flower. I want the amulet. Then another warrior with a bag full of some sort of sand that the system insisted was insanely valuable. I will take the strength ring with the highest skill damage and the one with the attack speed. According to the system, it was worth it, but Carl had no idea what the sand was for. Whatever, he would look it up later. Deal. He took the items and passed over the goods, which made the warrior smile. The Darklight host really will take anything on trade. Who would have thought that they would have a use for underworld sand? Oh, that's what it was. That was insanely valuable for death element creatures. Like the pair of black dragons in the tiny world. They could use it as a resource to help their power grow more quickly, as if they were in the divine plane, next to their goddess. The thing was, while it was super valuable, in theory it was only valuable to certain people. Carl had just put the sand away when a slender figure pushed through the crowd. I would like to buy a ½ kilogram of that underworld sand from you. The woman placed a bag of assorted void elemental stones on the counter, and Carl shrugged, then handed over a small portion of the sand. It was much heavier than it looked, and a half-kilo was no big loss. The necromancer smiled as she put the valuable resource in her inventory. If she had known that someone had underworld sand, she would have traded for it directly. But she had never thought that one of these brutish louts would have something so useful to a practitioner of the undead arts. Ray examined the item that Carl had just stored, and then grabbed a small portion of it for her space. It had a lovely ambience. She wasn't technically a death element creature, and her fundamental rules were not directly death element, being pain and blood. But it was still close enough to the aura of the spider goddess that it made her space more comfortable. Carl replaced the items, and the warriors took a moment to examine the new offerings. That gave the black-robed woman in the back a chance to slide to the front. Before I make a purchase, I would like to know, do you know if there is a beast master in your guild? A tengu with your same name. Carl examined the woman, and found that she had her name and information hidden. Whether by a skill or by an item, he didn't know. But what he did know is that he knew that face. The last time he saw it, she was a small girl. But she was a grown woman now. Or dragon. I know who you are looking for, Supreme Lady Rue of Gathuzan. The woman smiled. It seems that you do. I want those 2 rings, and then we simply must speak. I have many questions about what might have happened to that beast master. As she finished speaking, Kara walked out of the kitchen in cargo pants and a tank top, holding a breakfast burrito in both hands. She walked up to Rue, handed the confused dragon a burrito, and then vanished into the tiny world to get more cupcakes. She was going to need them today. She had a feeling about it. It was. Have a seat in the back, and I will bring you the items as soon as I finish with these other customers. Rue nodded and followed his directions into the back room, already beginning to suspect that things were not what they appeared to be here in the Darklight Host Guild House. For one, it had been over 10,000 years, but that Carl was a void immortal with a very young life force. He was also not a beast master of any sort. He had a pet sitter class which was similar but not directly related. The appearance of Kara was what gave it away. Either the real Carl was here, or they might be related. It wasn't unheard of to name your children after yourself, and the system didn't tag them as junior. So, this might be her ancient mentor's descendant. She sat down in the meeting room, and then snapped her attention to the corner of the room when a tentacle-faced monstrosity appeared with a tray of snacks. "Are you an ancient?" she asked, utterly baffled by the creature's appearance. "I am modeled after them, miss. I am a summoned construct known as a lesser watcher. I have refreshments for you." Carl chuckled as the dragon stared at the watcher. Being able to see through their eyes was absolutely overpowered when you wanted to play pranks on old friends. "So, you must be part of the pet sitter class skills, right? What sort of abilities do you have?" The watcher didn't answer for a moment, conferring with Carl on what was safe to tell her. "The primary ability of a watcher is to take care of guests and pets, so my strongest skill is pet space. However, I also have access to many other skills at a lesser power level. The Watchers are not particularly combat capable. However, we are well equipped to control wayward pets. Meaning, I have the Voidlock skill to freeze hostile creatures in place until they calm down. Rest assured, they are not harmed in the process. We are quite humane in our treatment of misbehaving pets." Chapter 1807. Rue Remembers. Rue smiled at the Watcher. "You know that I'm a Void Dragon, right? Void Lock is one of my favorite skills." The Watcher nodded. "Indeed, Supreme Lady. Carl informed me of the basics of your history just now. Would you perhaps like a raspberry tart?" Rue laughed and shook her head in dismay. "You know, those don't grow here, right? They're a mortal realm plant, though there are equivalents in this world. I can substitute the mountain tartberry if you prefer." That was the immortal realm equivalent of the raspberry, and they grew them in the tiny world now, for the sake of the mystic chefs. So, there were plenty available, even if the Watcher hadn't been able to simply will them into existence using the kitchen function of the pet space spell. In some ways, that spell was absolutely broken and overpowered, but in others it was so incredibly mundane that it could be overlooked. The space didn't have particularly strong defenses, even when it was made as a separate space. So, it wasn't a great defensive pocket dimension. It couldn't create weapons, eject unwanted visitors, or even cause damage. That was up to the occupant. However, if the creator knew of a food product, it would create it in the kitchen, up to the caster's level. And the beds were extremely comfortable, guaranteeing proper sleep for nearly any species. He's the same Carl, isn't he? Just cosplaying as a human to fit in with the locals. I can't say, madam. I don't know what other Carl you might have met in the past. That wasn't a no, Rue decided. Given his knowledge and his skill with the system, Rue was quite certain that she had managed to stumble upon her old mentor entirely accidentally after having come to see what the Dark Light host had for sale here. She had originally gone to a different world in the Immortal realms, but had moved here a few thousand years ago when she started looking to set up her own sect after reaching supremacy. Carl finished his sales and came to join Rue in the meeting room, while Lucille took over the counter at the store, assisted by the Dark Elves and one of the Elders. Carl sat down across from Rue, who smiled at him. Why don't you switch to your natural form, instead of this human disguise? My natural form is in some debate at the moment. However, it's not the Tengu form that you are most familiar with. That was a disguise chosen so that I would not be recognized when I returned from helping you get motivated. That was a mission you were sent on, right? As the avatar of the World Dragon? No, by the Temporal Dragon Misty. So, it really is you. How are you only now a void immortal? And your aura feels so young. Oh, we have so much to talk about. But I will give the abridged version. I actually came from your future. I didn't live the entire period between then and now. From my point of view, that was last year, or perhaps the year before. It hasn't been long for me. So, between then and now, a few years, you went from mythic to void immortal? Carl nodded. I reached tribulation about 6 months ago. The dragon blinked slowly. You went from a new immortal to this in 6 months. Carl shifted into Tengu form, so he would have a long beard to stroke in a sage gesture. As you know, I am a wise and knowledgeable elder of the Dark Light host. Surely, it's not a surprise that I advance quickly? Rue laughed until tears rolled down her face. I spent thousands of years as a newly advanced immortal dragon being picked on for being born mortal. And what do you get? 6 months to void immortal and your own guild branch in the immortal world, with no signs that anyone tries to suppress you at all. Carl shrugged. Oh, they did. I mean, not the new home merchant clan, they're very nice. But other clans came to try to suppress us for taking in newbies from the mortal worlds and treating them as equals. We killed them. Now, we still have a few purists who get snobby about being born in the immortal worlds, but power speaks louder than lineage here, so nobody takes their grievances too seriously. Are you really that powerful? Rue asked skeptically. Carl laughed and shifted to cat form and activated bestial raiment to bring out his battle armor and guild tabard. This is how they're more accustomed to seeing me in combat. I've got multiple forms of epic golems, including the Spirit Bear Tyrant, who has the stats of a dungeon boss, while being immune to physical damage. The Dark Elves in the front room are constructs that I made to help run the shop, and they're also epic golems. Rue whistled in appreciation. A blood stripe for peak immortal challenge kill. I take it that's how your guild managed to acquire this plot of land? I seem to recall it belonging to some nobody guild. Yeah, they were disbanded after their guild master was killed in single combat against me. I didn't even bring the beasts, and he still lost. I knew that I saw Kara earlier. It's been so long, but that face. There's no way that I could forget the Chaos Badger. She looks a bit more rough than I remember. Perhaps I just forgot about her having a scar after all these years. Still, she hasn't changed a bit. Though the magical food is a new thing, I don't remember that. Is it something that the Watcher makes? Those cupcakes were made by a mystic chef in the Blackwoods Pack, now part of the Dark Light Host Guild. It's become her tradition to give them to friends and people with empty pockets. Rue laughed. She just casually mugs people and stuffs food in their pockets if they don't have anything to steal, doesn't she? That's totally something that I can see a badger doing. She will be pleased to know that you appreciate her sensibilities. She is a firm believer in alleviating poverty with cupcakes. Chapter 1808. A lot of history. Kara came into the room, so she wasn't left out of the conversation, and the Watcher handed her a large cup of juice with a plate of pastries. A healthy breakfast, I see. Rue joked. I already had breakfast burritos, so I suppose this is a morning snack, not breakfast. How were things after we left? I missed out on so much gossip, and I've only seen glimpses from the years in between. What I don't get is why. Why go all the way back to when I was a child, help me awaken my powers, and then just leave? Do you know how hard I had to fight both before and after immortality? Carl gave her a sympathetic smile. The reason we were sent was because not helping you awaken would have been worse for the world than giving you the chance to make a future for yourself. We weren't sent to guide your whole life, only to give you the chance to make what you could with your own future from a fair start. Rue sighed. That sounds like the sort of nonsense that the time dragons spew. All right, if that's the reason, I won't hold it against you. Kara slid the snacks toward the dragon. So, do you have people now? Your own clan? I don't see a tag on your name. Come on, we need details. Oh, and Opal. She won't forgive us if she misses out. Opal. Forest trickster and former illusionary butterfly. She's a hopeless romantic and peerless storyteller. She makes illusionary plays and dramas to retell major moments in history, as well as to relay her own imaginary stories to the world. That sounds dangerous. Usually not. Though, she has illusion stones to allow users to insert themselves into the role of heroine in the romance stories. What now? She calls them build your own story type romance dramas. Everyone has roles, and the plot is set. But the outcome is up to the user. Rue looked intrigued, and Carl smiled as he shook his head. I should warn you that Opal has some unique tastes in romance. Some of them can get pretty wild. Rue winked at him. I was once a queen. I'm sure that I am at least somewhat familiar with the basics of the royal romance dramas. Good point. But she's got some other ones as well. I will have her send you a list later. I know that you're secretly a lady of culture. Rue laughed at the badger. I'm not 10 anymore. I believe that you wanted the 2 rings, right? Did you have something good to trade? Carl asked, diverting the conversation back on track. Rue nodded and took out a small pouch full of plant seeds. I promise you that these are worth far more than the rings are. I'm just a bit short on gear at the moment. Carl inspected the dragon. She was wearing a robe that covered herself with a disguise effect, but he didn't see any jewelry on her. Not just couldn't see the stats, she wasn't wearing any at all. It seems there is a lot more to your story than we've gotten so far. But I think that we can arrange a friends and family discount to get you a fresh set of gear. Lady Ray, my blood destruction spider partner, is happy to decorate pretty ladies. Are you flirting with me, Mr. Carl? Not at all. I'm actually quite happily married and soul-bonded. I was when we met as well. However, Ray is a true fashionista, and she prefers to put beautiful clothing on beautiful people. You really do have a strange group of beasts, don't you? Oh, it gets stranger. Carl laughed. There is a dark flame phoenix with a deep hatred for all things water element. The Naga matriarch who has gone full mad scientist with her alchemy. The Sero that evolved into a behemoth and married a red dragon priestess. And then there is Tion, who decided that a 3-kilo fox was the perfect form to be the group's bard. Rue shook her head in dismay. So, it's not just the 2 of you that are oddballs? What do you mean? I'm the normal one here, Kara insisted. That is a concerning statement. She's joking mostly. If any of us are normal, it's definitely Dana. And maybe either Thor or Leo. The scale-obsessed behemoth? I will give you Leo, but calling Thor normal is a stretch, Kara countered. Rue watched them banter and shrugged. Isn't that normal for a Sero or a dragon? There's just something about a muscular dragon with well-polished scales, you know? Kara frowned. Or it could just be that all dragons are a bit weird and scale-obsessed. I mean, fluffy ears are much cuter. Rue turned to Carl. Do you support that position? He married a divine fox girl. He's not going to go against the power of fluffy ears. Rue gave Carl a knowing look, and he just shrugged. Oh, it gets worse. She wasn't born a divine fox. No, his bonded beasts turned her into one so that she could be the perfect wife for him and keep up with his power growth. When you put it like that, It sounds like a nefarious plot. Really, it was just Remy wanting to try out a new advancement potion and lacking medical ethics, Carl noted. That doesn't make it sound better. Rue informed him. The fox ears are cute though, just like Tion's. Kara giggled at the dragon's confused look. He's our team's stone fur divine fox. An adorable little fluff ball, but he's far too gullible, and he gets pulled into all sorts of shenanigans, including the one where our Dana mage gained fox ears. He was brought along as both a potion ingredient and the healer, in case the experiment went wrong. But we are focusing on us too much. How did you end up here? What did you do in the middle? Did you bring more people? Are they entertaining? Right, you're not one to let things go just because I diverted the topic. Alright, where do I begin? I suppose I should go from the start, from the moment that you two left Gthuzan. Chapter 1809. Rue's Past. Rue took a deep breath and focused on the story. As you likely know, after you left, I was taken in by the Crown Prince. We were wed not long after you left, and it was a bit of a scandal at the time, but nothing compared to what came after. You see, the other branches of the family weren't happy about a half-breed dragonkin being queen after he ascended. It led to so many assassination attempts that we gave up on trying to explain my marriage being within the rules as I could transform, and we simply held a purge of the extended family branches. Not an extermination. He was too soft-hearted for that. But about a quarter of the royal family of Gthuzan was culled after an attempted coup. He should have finished them all. We ruled together for, I suppose 100 years or so. Those were good days, and our descendants are still the main branch of the royal family. I know. We were cousins. But our children were glorious, some of the strongest dragons that the kingdom has ever seen. I still say that was the right choice, and he was both a good husband and a good king. There were some years there after he was assassinated, where I was a bit angry and bitter at the world. You see, I made immortality first, and those hoping for the throne wanted to use one of our children as a puppet. So, they managed to poison the king while I was out of the castle. By the time I got back, it was too late. So, instead of letting them win and seize the throne, I took it for myself. It was a terrible time in my past. I had to kill fully a third of my own children before things were settled, and they understood that the good of the nation comes first in the selection of the next monarch. Weak and greedy leaders should never be allowed into positions of power. Power is for the powerful. A few generations later, there was a boy among the young princes, one who had that gleam in his eye. He was born with talent, not like me. But that wasn't enough for him. He had that drive, and he pushed for absolute dominance. I passed my throne to him and moved to the immortal worlds, thinking that my fully formed immortal spirit made me nearly invincible. I was wrong. So wrong. The world that I made it to was in the middle of a massive planet-wide clan war. As an unaligned spirit immortal, I was forcibly inducted into one of the clans with a subservience collar and sent to the front lines. That was their first mistake. On that world, things were even more strongly power-motivated than this one. The planet was split into 1,000 regions between 1,000 demigods. Each of them had their own faction, and none of them could tolerate each other. Now, being a void dragon who lived and breathed war for the first time, I quickly attracted the attention of the red dragon. It was glorious, and we bathed the world in blood. But we were mere ants in the actual battle. When 100,000 legends took to the battlefield for the final conflict, I wasn't even a consideration. I was very nearly killed by a stray attack and sent to this world through a crack in space-time. Fortunately, the subservience collar shattered when the demigod it was bound to was destroyed, and I was free to remain here. I made it to ascended immortality during the war, so I roamed this world for some time, learning about immortality in a way that was more than serving a demigod. My progress was slow, much slower than it had been without the assistance of divine energy. Even though I had the potential to make immortality during that dark time on a mortal world, I lacked the potential to go much further. So, I spent a few thousand years looking for opportunities and ways to increase my potential. About 1,000 years ago, just after I had reached peak immortality, I found a dragon inheritance on one of the other worlds I visited. It was a Void Dragon Legends inheritance, and it was enough to push me through to supremacy, though my innate potential was lacking. When I came back, I was feeling invincible again. So, I thought that maybe I could settle down and go back to the glory days of Gthuzan. I started a clan up on the north side of this continent, in the Valalan League. I named it the Gthuzan clan and took in wayward immortals. We had a couple good centuries there, and then we were attacked by one of the larger guild alliances who wanted our territory. The clan was wiped out, and I barely escaped with my life. I've been wandering since. I just don't have the heart to take in a new group of disciples and start over after seeing so much of what immortality is like. So, I've just been wandering, looking for interesting things and wallowing in nostalgia. That was why I remembered the man who had helped me start all this and become more than nothing in the first place. Tell me, what made you want to start a guild branch here, instead of staying with a clan and staying loyal to them until you had enough power? Carl smiled sadly. Nothing had gone right in Rue's life. Every time she tried to settle down, things went bad. Being in the clan and being in the guild are two different things. I don't view myself as having left or been disloyal to the clan. We still work together, and they have a full branch here. But mostly, it was that we took in a whole pack of lichens after their village was attacked. They could have gone their own way, but they wanted to learn the unique sorts of skills that the members of the Dark Light host possess. I don't suppose that you're tired of wandering? We've got comfortable beds here, and we could use an old friend with leadership experience. Chapter 1810. Recruiting Rue. Rue smiled at Carl. You know, that doesn't sound too bad. I doubt that I am ever going to be cut out to be a leader. I don't have that sort of luck, or the people skills to build alliances properly. That's where I've failed both times. I tried to lead. But it would be nice to be part of a group again, you know? Somewhere to belong instead of wandering around in an infiltration robe to hide my aura and stats. Yeah, what's up with the robe? A supreme can't wander freely. My mere presence in most clans' territory would incite a war. The arrival of an unknown supreme in another supreme's territory without invitation is generally considered to be an act of provocation, if not outright war. That makes sense. I hadn't considered that, as you are the first supreme that has been here who isn't directly an ally. Narissa of the New Home Merchant clan comes by sometimes, as well as the pack leader of the Blackwoods pack. But there isn't usually another supreme here. If you will agree to stay and join us, I will let them know of your arrival. And then I will induct you into the guild, so that there is no dispute whether you're friendly or an ally. The Supremes of the Dark Light host already came by once to join in our clan war when the new home was attacked. Supremes from another planet came to assist you? That's some serious connection building. Carl laughed. I didn't even know them. They got the notification that I had raised the war banner and came to join in the festivities. You have a war banner? I have the skill. Did you know that it doesn't mention that you can't actually take it back down until the end of the war? That's a little detail that I was informed of later. But yes, I used it to give the new home an edge in the battle, since our allies were cut off from reinforcing us. Rue laughed. So, you put up a war banner, without any thought of what it actually meant, and without the concept of defeat ever entering your mind?
Exactly.
Things will work themselves out, or I won't be around to see it. Either way, it's really not my problem. I like the way that you think. All right, I will agree to join your Darklight host. By the way, what made you join the guild? It's one of the legendary divine guilds, and the first world I was on had one of their demigods fighting for control. How did you even end up connected to that sort of guild? Carl laughed. Oh, that's a fun story too. You see, I didn't exactly join the Darklight host. You see, when the guild function came online on our world, I was placed into it by the system and made a branch leader. I've been one ever since, founding new branches as I move up in power. There are 2 branches in our old world now. 3 if you count Matilda's, which is quite small. And now I've started one in this compound that we won. The system awarded the Darklight host this place as a reward for taking out their guild leader in a challenge, and once we had the Blackwoods pack with a need for a new place to live, it was only natural to move in. That makes sense in a way. All right, bring me in, Mr. Carl. Rue giggled at the words, remembering her childhood. Now, she was 10,000 years old, while Carl was far younger and less powerful than she was. Somehow, he still felt like her senior in some way. She had tried so many things that failed, but he had just been moving from one success to another. Guild contract offered. Rue has entered the Dark Light host. Kara cheered. One of us. One of us. Rue laughed. You are crazy, you know that, right? In the good way. Ooh, we should make the Carl give you a trade skill. You didn't have a trade skill, did you? Rue shook her head. No, I don't have a formal trade skill. I trained at Inscription, but never got the trade skill. I got the skill book and talisman mage class skills instead, learned manually. Perhaps because of the activation state of the system at the time? And then for thousands of years after I became an immortal, there was no chance. It was just battle, constant battle to survive the clan wars. Either way, I don't have a formal trade skill. Kara examined her. Well, you're a void dragon, and I was once a void badger. So we have a few things in common. The question is, what aspect of creation would be best for you? I think that it would be funniest if we gave you runecrafting so you could make supreme ranked accessories and troll the market. Ruth smiled at her. That could be entertaining. But perhaps weapons? Even if you only sell a few every decade, supreme ranked weapons are the sort of thing that entire clans are built around. They give a peak immortal the power to defend his territory in a challenge, and they're incredibly valuable. That's still runecrafting, unless we find a way to teach you blacksmithing as well. I would say we could teach Hawk to be a smith, but he's already picked mystic cooking for his fire. Oh, the Dark Flame Phoenix, right? I take it that he's a foodie. Very much so. Actually, I have a skill book that might work. How does your training thing work? Rue asked. I combine skills that either I know or one of the beasts on my team knows, and then I combine them with other skills to create an improved version I can teach to others. It's one of the World Dragon Avatar type abilities. Kara made grabby hands, and Rue held out the book to her. You want to be a blacksmith? Don't be silly. I can't learn that. But I know someone who can. Our little friend Tion is a stone fur divine fox. He's naturally earth element, perfect for blacksmithing.